Hi everybody, Penny here. Welcome to my kitchen. So first I have to apologize. I didn't do any videos in February. It was a rather difficult month, wasn't feeling well, but all is good now. So this is for the middle of March 2023, and I am going to make the easiest bread I have ever made in my life. The only drawback is it only makes one loaf. Now, I did a test run because it was a recipe that they were going to try at the Live and Learn Center here in Guelph, and it's called Easy Roman Cheese Bread, and they were studying Italy and they were going to be making a Roman dish. So this came off the internet. I don't know what website, but it's super easy. So it starts with a half a cup of milk, which I have here, and you have to warm it. So I warmed it in the microwave, 25 seconds, gave it a whirl, another 25 seconds, and it needs to be more warm, like not lukewarm, but warmer, but not quite hot. Like if you were testing a baby bottle on your wrist, that type of temperature. So it then calls for yeast, of course, and sugar, because the yeast needs the sugar in order to have something to eat. So there's the sugar mixed in. I'll leave that spoon in there. And it calls for yeast. So I have the quick rise yeast here, and I'm going to put in 2 heaping teaspoons. If you have the packaged yeast, I'm not sure exactly how much is in the packages, but it would be equal to 2 teaspoons is what you're looking for the 1 loaf of bread. Now, depending on your elevation, so for my people in Newfoundland, you may get away with 1 teaspoon because your elevation is different. I don't quite understand it all. I just know that's how it works. When we were in Newfoundland, I could easily get, can I have a knife, Caitlin? Can you pass me a knife? A full 7 loaves of bread out of a batch of bread. Here in Ontario, in Southern Ontario, I would be very lucky to get 5. So the elevation really does make a difference. I don't understand it, I just know it's true. So you need to leave that then for about 10 minutes. So while that's puffing up, for lack of a better word, I'm going to talk to you about the recipe. You have to be really careful about internet recipes because they often have mistakes. People are human, people make mistakes, but I did find quite a few in this particular recipe. First of all, it calls for a half cup of milk and then 10 grams of yeast and 400 grams of flour, and then it goes back down and talks about 1 teaspoon of salt and 1 tablespoon of sugar. So it goes back and forth between traditional and metric. So that's a little difficult, but not to worry, I've made all the changes. And it also talks about salt and sugar, but in the instructions, never mentions the salt, never mentions the sugar. So if you're following the instructions and you don't catch that, your yeast is not going to rise and your bread is going to be really bland. It only calls for 1 teaspoon of salt because it also has 75 grams of Pecorino Romano cheese. So I did a test run, and this is the test run. Lovely rise, beautiful bread, cannot taste the cheese. So we're not putting cheese in today. We're just doing ordinary, everyday loaf of bread. But if you did want to put in some Parmesan, Pecorino, Asiago, whatever, I would recommend like 2 cups because it really, you can't taste it. So if you're going to have it in there, you want to be able to taste it. So we'll just put that aside. I also found it a little dry. So when I researched what would make a yeast bread dry, the first thing that came up was you're using butter instead of oil, which it did. And the explanation was that butter goes solid at room temperature, whereas of course oil stays liquid. So the butter apparently can be part of the reason why your yeast bread is dry. Another reason would be that you let it rise too long. So the instructions said to let it rise for an hour. I'm only going to do it for about 45 minutes today and see what happens. It also said to bake it for an hour. Now I checked it, oven's preheated to 350. I checked it at 45 minutes and it was done. Yeah, that's the oven, it's preheated. It's good. That means it's up to temperature. Means it's ready. So I'm going to do it today. I'm going to check it at 35 minutes because bread is done at 190 degrees if you have a thermometer that you can check it with. And it was like 197. So it didn't need even 45 minutes. And if I had left it in there for an hour, it probably would have burnt. So those are the three things we're going to do differently today. We're going to try the oil instead of butter. We're going to rise for 45 minutes instead of an hour. And we're going to bake it for 35 to 45 minutes. I'm going to check it at 35 minutes and see how it's doing. If you do add any type of Italian cheese to this bread, I would also recommend you add your favorite Italian dried herbs. So oregano, thyme, basil. Oregano for me would be lovely. I think that would add a fabulous flavor. But we're not doing that today. We're just doing the plain, ordinary, everyday bread. Okay, so it's an egg bread. So we have 6 extra large eggs. If you have small to medium eggs, I would probably use 7. But these are extra large. So Caitlin is the egg master, and she's going to put all of those in here. And I want you to crack it on the counter, not on the side of the bowl. When you crack things on the side of the bowl, you increase the risk of getting shells into your mixture, and we don't want that. So we're going to crack it on the counter, right? And then put it in the bowl. There you go. That's a bit much. Make sure you got no shells. Right? Perfect. So she's going to do that, all the eggs. And I'm going to do the dry ingredients with you. And our yeast is working. That's lovely. So I have 3 1/4 cups of plain white flour. And we're going to be adding 2 teaspoons of salt. It called for 1 teaspoon. Please don't crack it on the side of the bowl. Go ahead and put it in the thing. But I'd like you to crack it on the counter, not on the side of the bowl. There you go. One more. There. So that's how she learned. Very hard to teach new tricks. Okay. Because this called for the pecorino cheese and Parmesan cheese or Asiago cheese, those are very salty cheeses. So it only called for 1 teaspoon of salt. But I'm going to put in 2 teaspoons. Because if you don't add enough salt, you won't have flavorful bread. So that's that part. Good job. Excellent. Put all that over there. And what else have we got here? So we've got our eggs and our salt. And that's about it. So I'm just going to whisk in. Now if you were adding the cheese, this is where you would put it. Okay? So I'm just going to whisk the salt in so it's evenly distributed. We're going to turn on our eggs. Okay. Yeah, I don't see any shells. Good job. So I'm going to turn this on. Get those. You don't have to have them really whipped like you would for a dessert, but you want to have them somewhat. Now, if you don't have an electric mixer, not to worry. You can use a wooden spoon. Obviously, you need to whisk your eggs. And then you need to use a wooden spoon to mix the flour in with the eggs. And then when it comes time to, when it starts getting really sticky, turn your wooden spoon over and use the handle. And it won't stick as much. And then, so you don't knead this bread like you would traditionally on a board and you're pushing it and everything. But you do knead it with the handle of the wooden spoon. But once we get it mixed, we're going to switch over to a dough hook. And we're going to do that in here. Okay, so now we have our 3 1/2 cups of flour, 2 teaspoons of salt. We have our 6 eggs. Now we're going to add the oil into the eggs, and that's a 1/4 cup of just vegetable oil, whatever you have in the house. There we go. Oh, our yeast looks great. And basically now, we're just going to put a little bit in at a time. and get that all mixed up. And then at the end, we're going to add our yeast. So I'm just going to put in a little bit and a little bit more. Oops, I'm making a mess. Can I have a spoon, Caitlin? Big spoon out of the drawer. Thank you. And do it this way so I don't make as much mess, although I'm sure I'll still make a mess. Now if you wanted to use whole wheat flour, you can certainly do that. The test loaf that I did half of whole wheat and half of white flour. So now we're going to add in our yeast. Yay! Look at that. And it's all proofed up. Yay! And now we're going to switch over to the dough hook. So we'll take all that dough off. Look at that. It looks so good. So your yeast needs to stand about 10 minutes. But it was lovely and all puffed up. It was ready. Okay, so we're going to take this one off. There we go. You want to take that, Caitlin? Thank you. I'm just going to use my clean hands to put that back in there. And then we'll put the dough hook on. Put that back in. Lock her up. And we're going to let her go for 5 minutes, and then we'll be back. Okay, everybody, it's been 5 minutes, and our dough is ready. So we're going to scrape off as much as we can off the dough hook. And if you're doing this with a wooden spoon handle, you would have kneaded it somewhere between 8 to 10 minutes until it looks very elasticy, but it's not going to be like your regular bread dough, nice and smooth and able to handle. This is very sticky, and as you can see, it doesn't form. Can you see that? It's very sticky. It's not quite as thick as regular bread dough, but thicker than a cake batter, if that makes sense. So Caitlin has gone ahead and greased the pan for me. She always does that. She's excellent at it. Gets all the corners and everything. So now we're just going to scrape this down into the pan. I don't use spray for my baked goods when I'm greasing the pan. I find, it's just personal preference, but I find sometimes I can taste it on the crust of the bread, and the crust turns out not quite the same. I don't know how to explain it, but I much prefer to have the actual butter or oil. Okay, so we're just gonna spread that out a little bit. Spread it. You don't want to flatten it, you just want to kind of spread it to the corners. And I think we're good. Okay, so that's about half the height of the pan. I have the oven preheated, so on top of the oven where it's nice and warm, it tells me to put a damp tea towel. So that is what we're doing. Never did that before either. Always used like a higher bowl, you know, and the saran wrap, wrapper and towels and so on. But this is just a damp tea towel, which I think is fantastic. So we're gonna lay it right there in the middle on the top of the stove, and we're gonna leave it for 45 minutes, and then we're gonna put it in the oven at 350. We don't have to do anything else. And then I'm gonna check it after 35 minutes. So at that point, we'll be back. Actually, we'll be back after 45 minutes so you can see how it's risen. Then we'll put it in the oven for 35 minutes, and when it's done, we'll be back. Hi everybody. So it did take the full hour to rise. I checked it after 45 minutes, and it had risen a little bit, but not the full height of the pan. So this is a dry towel that I put on top of the damp towel, which will stick to your bread a little bit, and that's okay. Don't worry about it. All right, so as you can see, it's almost the full height of the pan. So now I'm gonna put it in the oven, at 350, and I'm gonna check it in 35 minutes. Okay, everybody, she's ready. Okay, so she was in the oven for 40 minutes. At 35 minutes, she only registered at 175 degrees, and it has to be at least 190. So we waited 5 more minutes, 191. So that was perfect. Now, if you don't have a thermometer, you want to make sure that it sounds hollow when you tap it. I don't know if you can hear that, but that's the sound that you're looking for. Now, she's only out of the oven about 5 minutes, so she's still really warm, but we're gonna cut into it. Oh my gosh, look, just like butter. Oh my, that's so good. Look at that. And we brushed her with some butter when she came out of the oven. Now, you don't shape this dough, obviously, because it's too sticky. So that's why it's like a little bit of a different shape. You don't have any control over that, and that's just fine. Not to worry. So let's put a little bit of butter. And she's still warm, so it's melting. It's so good. Ah! Yes, Daisy, I'll give you some in just a minute. Okay. Definitely moisture. No butter, use oil. Let it rise for a full hour, but only 40 minutes in the oven. It's really, really good. I hope you give it a go. Enjoy. Bye.